very good morning to you from wherever you're watching from. My name is teacher Jasper Ondimu, and I'm here today for a lesson on history, and we shall be focusing on IGCSE history. And this particular topic and depth study, we look at Germany, how it was formed as a republic, some of the challenges that were faced from 1918 all the way to 1939. Of course, it is quite a long topic and I cannot exhaust it in this particular lesson, but today we're going to look at the introduction part of it. We shall look at the revolution of 1918 and the establishment of the republic, because remember, we're talking about the First World War, 1914 to 1918, and Germany was humiliated by the Allies. They were forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles, what we refer to as the armistice, and therefore Germany was in a very awkward position, considering that this is a country that had a lot of pride and therefore being humiliated by the Allies. And in this case, we refer to France, Britain as well, and then also the United States of America had an hand in it. So we shall look at 1918 after the signing of the armistice, or before the signing of the armistice. The Kaiser had abdicated, and the president who came into power, Friedrich Ebert, signed the armistice, or was forced to sign the armistice under the circumstances that were there. So we shall look at the revolution of 1918. Then we shall look at the Versailles settlement and the German reaction to it, because the Germans were really devastated that their country was being humiliated to this extent, because the generals who were on the field, they were assuring the Germans that they were going to win. And therefore, when they have been forced to sign an armistice, which is really against the wishes of the German people, we shall be looking at how do the German people react to this kind of devastation. We shall also look at the Weimar Constitution. After the Kaiser abdicated, Friedrich Ebert, who came into power as the chancellor then, took over power and introduced a lot of reforms in what is known as the Weimar Constitution. We shall be looking at some of the reforms that were introduced by this particular Weimar Constitution. Then we shall also focus on the political disorder. The period is 1919 to 1923, especially when a government comes into power and under the circumstances of a country like Germany, that was, in terms of governance, the Kaiser was ruling on very well, but the First World War spells doom for Germany, and therefore the government that comes into power faces a lot of challenges. That is what we shall be looking at. We shall specifically focus on the French invasion of rule, and also we shall look at the hyperinflation, and then we will wind up by looking at the Streseman's era. This was a person who brought a lot of reforms that helped Germany to get out of the economic chaos that it was facing at this particular time. So, my dear student, you can take a pen and paper so that we can go through these particular areas that I have mentioned. In case you have any question, you can talk to us. The number is down on your screen. So as I said, this is History 0470 IGCSE. It is also closely related to some topics that are offered in the International Baccalaureate Diploma Program curriculum. A topic like authoritarian states, where you look at Adolf Hitler, his emergency, how he consolidated his power, and also the effects of his rule. That is in paper 2 of IBDP. So it is a very important topic. You can also follow, even if you are a KCSE student, you can also understand this particular topic from the context of the First World War. So as I said, during the First World War, and the period that we are talking about here is 1914 to 1918. During this particular period, Germany was ruled by a Kaiser. A Kaiser is a title, is a German title to refer to a king. And the Kaiser was in charge of government and the army. The Kaiser is the one who appointed a chancellor. And during this particular period, on the rule of the Kaiser, the German people enjoyed or respected their government because the government was very authoritarian. The Kaiser himself spent a lot of money in equipping the military, and therefore the German people were really satisfied with their government. And during the towards the end of the First World War, when Germany has been caught hands down by the Allies, there was a crisis. And during this particular time, the Reichstag in this particular case, we mean Parliament, they give an ultimatum to Kaiser to get out of power. And eventually, Kaiser abdicated. Abdicated means he abandoned his position. And then the leader of the Social Democrat Party, who was known as Friedrich Ebert, came into power. And immediately Friedrich Ebert took over power, he signed the armistice. And the armistice in this particular case will refer to the Treaty of Versailles. And remember the terms of the Treaty of Versailles that we shall be looking at much later on. So what was the perspective, or what was the opinion of the ordinary Germans in regard to this particular, we refer to it as the Weimar government signing of this particular armistice? The German people were very devastated because, as I had said initially, the Germans by nature were very proud people, and therefore being humiliated by the Allies is a feeling that that they didn't like. And something important to note is that the Kaiser himself had special links to the German people, in that he was the one running the government, and therefore the German people were used to being governed by the Kaiser himself. And when Friedrich Ebert is taking over power, he's going to introduce some democracy on the German people. And the Germans are not going to like it because they are used to being given directions and instructions. They are used to authoritarianism, and therefore the German people did not like the Weimar government. And therefore the Weimar government began on a very weak ground. So the First World War had a lot of effects on the German people. We are talking about psychological effects, we are talking about economic effects, we are talking about financial effects. And talking about the physical, to note that farming had been disrupted during the First World War. By 1918, Germany was producing only half of the milk and 60% of the meat that it needed. The British Navy was blockading German ports, meaning that they could not get food from other countries. Around 750,000 Germans died from hunger and disease. And remember, during this particular time, financially, the Germans could not borrow money from any country, because every country could not be able to trust Germany. And therefore, Germany was really suffering economically during this particular time of from 1918. And then also, there were psychological effects on the German people, in the sense that the Germans had been this particular proud, ambitious country, and had worked extremely hard and many sacrifices to win the war. Throughout the war, they were being assured by the generals who were fighting the war that they were going to win. And here now the tables are turning. They have been defeated, and they have been forced to sign an armistice that is not proportional to their participation during that particular war. As there was the introduction of the war guilt clause, and in this particular clause, Germany was blamed for causing the war, when indeed other countries like Austria, like Russia, can also be blamed for entering this particular war and for starting this particular war, especially Austria. And therefore, Germany itself, carrying this particular burden of causing the war, paying reparations to France, was really very painful. And therefore, psychologically, the German people were very demotivated. This is akin to an example where someone who has been bragging, a very proud person, and all of a sudden, this particular person is humbled. And this is what happened to Germany, that they were really humbled by the signing of the armistice. And also, it is important to note, there's a concept that we usually refer to history as the stab in the back. And in this particular case, it was actually the army that signed the surrender. But the people started saying it was the new government, the Weimar Republic, that was to blame. People couldn't understand why they had lost the war when Germany had not been invaded. They assumed the politicians had stabbed the army in the back by surrendering when they could have won. The army were delighted to pretend that this was true, because in the real sense, the person who signed this particular armistice was the Weimar government that was led by the president then, as I've said, Friedrich Ebert. So all these factors meant that the new government, called the Weimar Republic, started off as very weak. Germany was in a mess, and the people were against the government from the beginning because they saw it as very weak, and they blamed the government for the defeat in World War I, and also for signing the armistice that was really punishing Germany. Now, let us change gears and focus on the Weimar Republic's constitution. The new government that was formed, that was led by Friedrich Ebert, was called the Weimar Republic. It was named after a town that is found near Berlin. Berlin is the capital city of Germany. And therefore, that is where the government was started. Hence the word Weimar government, because that is where the government was started. And the government started in 1918, 2 days after Germany surrendered in World War I. And Friedrich Ebert, who took over power during this particular time, helped the German people to come up with a constitution. And in this particular constitution, which is very critical, as a student of IGCSE, you must understand some of the provisions of this particular constitution. The constitution provided for the position of the president, and the president had the powers to appoint and also sack the chancellor. He had powers to command the army, powers to call new elections, and powers to use Article 48. Article 48 is also known as the Enabling Act. And in this particular article, this particular article empowered the president to use the powers which he had in order to declare a state of emergency. And during this particular time, the president was allowed to suspend the constitution, to suspend the rules of natural justice, and basically be a dictator. And this is the article that Adolf Hitler used at some point to become a dictator. Then there was also the introduction of the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, among other functions, had the function of checking if the Constitution was being followed. And that tells you that indeed the Weimar government was a democratic government that the Germans were not used to, because the Germans were used to a Kaiser who was a king. And also the Weimar constitution provided that the German people were allowed to vote. Anyone who was above 20 years old was allowed to vote. The people could vote for the Reichstag. The Reichstag, in this case, we refer to parliament, for a period of 4 years. They could also vote for the president for a period of 7 years. And then they could also vote in plebiscites. Plebiscites are like referendums. The Weimar Constitution also gave the people various rights and freedom. They had the freedom of speech, the freedom of the press, and also they could join unions. The Weimar government also gave the people freedom of voting, and they allowed that anyone could stand for elections. And that means, as I've always emphasized here, or as I've emphasized right now, is that the Weimar Constitution was a very democratic constitution. And this was not loved by the German, because during this particular time, democracy was not a popular form of government. And therefore, the Germans, considering they were being ruled by Kaiser, who was used to telling them everything to do, the Weimar government was very weak. And remember, you can be asked a question at the IGCSE level, that is IGCSE paper 1, asking you some of the successes of the Weimar government, the weaknesses of the Weimar government. It is also important that you mention some of the aspects that we've talked about here, about democracy, about the Supreme Court checking if the constitution was being followed. The German people were being given the right to vote. Is one of the successes of the Weimar government. Also, another success of the Weimar government is to do with voting. And under this, we talk about proportional representation, which we usually abbreviate as PR. And in this particular case, we mean that very modern and fair voting system where a party gets a number of seats directly proportional to the percentage of votes it got. If your party got 12% of all votes in Germany, that means that you could get 12% of the seats in the Reichstag. However, this was a disadvantage in the sense that the tiny political parties which could not get over 50% of the votes, they could not easily form the majority. And during this particular time, there was no party that was forming the majority. Also, there was Article 48 that we've referred to as the Enabling Act. The Enabling referred to as the Enabling Act. This particular article in the Constitution allowed the president to rule by decree. Decree means a dictatorship in an emergency. This meant that he could make decisions and laws without having to ask the Reichstag to vote on it. This was designed to protect Germany in an emergency. However, this meant that the president could rule as a dictator in an emergency. And the disadvantage of it is that the president is the one who could decide on what an emergency was. And this was subject to abuse and needed the president to be honest, to want to protect the republic. And as we said, or we shall look at it much later, that Adolf Hitler used the Enabling Act, Article 48, to get into power and also to turn into a dictator. So when you're being asked the strengths or the successes of the Weimar government, as I said, you must bring up the issue of democracy, where the German people aged above 20 years of age were allowed to vote. That was a big achievement. Then there was also the proportional representation voting system was a bit fairer. Each party got a number of seats in the proportion or to the percentage of the votes they got. And then the president had massive powers equivalent to what a president in the United States of America had, because they could now be able to make serious decisions in case of a crisis through the Enabling Act of Article 48. Then there is also freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom to set up trade unions, and freedom to form any political party. All of these were completely freedoms for the German people and very modern for that particular time. However, there were weaknesses of the Weimar Constitution. The first one being the PR. PR, we've talked about proportional representation. Why was it a weakness? Because it meant that whatever government or party was in power, it was always weak. Governments always had to compromise, and decisions could take long. because you had to, the fact that you don't have the majority means you're going to talk to quite a number of other political parties. That means that decision making is going to be very slow because you're likely to consult these particular parties. And also Article 48, which I have mentioned here, that gave the president powers to rule by decree, later on is going to be used by Adolf Hitler to turn Germany into a dictatorship. And it is important to note that by 1919, the Republic already had loads of enemies. This constitution was too fair. It gave these people the vote and the right to create their own parties, like the Nazi party that Adolf Hitler used to get into power. And also being asked to vote was seen as a sign of weakness by many Germans who were used to following orders from the Kaiser. And therefore, questions on the constitution are likely to be based around what the achievements or the problems of the Weimar Republic as a whole were. Broad questions like what were the achievements of the Weimar Republic should include bits of the constitution, like free speech and free voting in your answers. And also questions on problems that the Weimar Republic faced should definitely include discussions like proportional representation that we've talked about was disadvantaging the government that was in power because they were taking a long time to make decisions, and also they had a lot of enemies. And therefore, in a nutshell, you must be able to understand from that particular background the Weimar Republic. How did it come to existence? What were some of the clauses or articles in the Weimar Constitution that supported democracy? And what were some of the disadvantages of those particular articles? Now, we switch gears to look at the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles. And remember, the Treaty of Versailles was signed between the Allies and Germany, and they were basically punishing Germany for starting the war. And the Treaty of Versailles, looking at it, the ordinary Germans, they first expect a fair treaty. Germany was in real trouble. World War I had bankrupted the country, and some were starving. The Weimar government assumed the treaty would be light so as not to cost more German lives. The Kaiser was gone. A new democratic government was in place, just like the Allies had. Germans assumed the winning powers would like these and also want to help Germany to remain stable. But that is not their expectations. Woodrow Wilson, who was the president of the United States of America then, came up, this particular Woodrow Wilson, someone is whispering to my ears. Woodrow Wilson came up with 14 points that would make a better world and believed the treaty would allow Germany to recover. There is a student who is following at home and is asking, this is which topic? We are talking about IGCSE. This is not a KCSE curriculum. We're talking about IGCSE curriculum. It is a British curriculum. The topic is depth study, and at the depth study we are studying Germany. So we are looking at Germany as a country, how they began as a republic, and also all the way to the emergence of Adolf Hitler's dictatorship and the life in the Nazi party. I hope the student at home has benefited a bit. So looking at the Treaty of Versailles, what did the Allies, Britain, France, and the United States of America want from the Treaty of Versailles? Let us begin with France. George Clemenceau wanted, George Clemenceau was from France. He wanted to crush Germany completely. Remember the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 to 1871. During this particular war between France and Germany, Now, France had occupied two provinces of Alsace and Lorraine. And these two particular provinces were rich in iron ore. They were rich in iron ore and coal. And therefore, Germany, as we began our topic by saying that Germany was very proud, and Germany came and took away these two provinces of France, that this is Alsace and Lorraine. And France was left a very bitter person, a very humiliated person that has been humiliated by Germany. And remember, during this particular time, France was the unchallenged land power. Unchallenged land power. Unchallenged land power. A dear student, I know you usually hear during the national celebrations of national holidays, whereby you hear the MC says, wanaopita mbele yako sasa hivi ni vikosi vya nchi kavu. So during this particular time, France is the unchallenged land power. Britain, on the other hand, is the unchallenged sea power or unchallenged naval power. And therefore, Germany coming to take her two provinces of Alsace and Lorraine humiliated France. That is one of the reasons for the scramble and partition for Africa. And therefore, during the signing of the armistice or signing of these particular treaties, France wanted Germany to be completely crushed so that Germany could not be able to revenge again. And France also wanted Germany to pay massive reparations, and also Germany to be disarmed. And therefore, from that particular aspirations, you can realize that indeed France was the most bitter with Germany, and therefore wanted Germany to be crushed completely. And also on the other side, what did Britain want from this particular armistice? David Lloyd George wanted to punish Germany harshly and get money from them, but he wanted Germany to be able to recover. In other words, the treaty should not be too harsh on the German people. However, there was someone who was seated on the fence, and this is the President of the United States of America, known as Woodrow Wilson. He believed that Germany was not the only country to blame, and therefore he wanted that a punishment meted on Germany commensurate to the activities that the Germans had done during this particular war. He therefore didn't want a very harsh treaty on Germany. But what carried the day? It is the terms of the French and the British carried the day, in the sense that Germany was completely destroyed in this particular term. And also it is important for you as a student to understand what were some of the terms that were given on the Germans. We usually use the abbreviation of LAMB. We use this particular abbreviation of LAMP, and L stands for land, A stands for army, and then M stands for money, and B stands for blame. Talking about land, how was Germany affected from this particular treaty of Versailles, or generally, how was German punished? German was punished whereby 13% of land and 6 million German people were lost. In this case, we are saying that the size of Germany was reduced, and also 10% of industry and 15% of agricultural land was taken away. Alsace and Lorraine that we talked about, which were taken by Germany, they were reverted back to France. The Saar coalfields were given back to France for 15 years. The Polish corridor was given back to Poland, and this will later start World War II, which we shall look at it much later. So assume you are the German, and then you've read these particular clauses. They're telling you're going to lose 13% of land and 6 million of your people. Alsace and Lorraine, which were rich in iron ore and coal, have gone back to France. Suppose you are an ordinary German, what are you likely, or how are you likely to take this particular treaty that you have signed? The German people felt that their land was being stolen, and some Germans now were living in other countries like Poland and also even France. And this created a lot of problems in terms of economy, because the Allies have taken over the lands of Germany, and therefore we are going to have a crisis of food that we talked about earlier on. So this is land. So this is L for land. Then there is A for army. I said L for land. There is A for army. France wanted Germany to be completely crushed in the sense that it could not be able to revenge again. So they are going to target the army. What are they going to say? That the army was reduced to 100,000 men that could protect Germany. These people, 100,000, cannot be able to sustain a long-term war. Also, Germany was directed not to have any air force. The navy was limited to 6 battleships, no submarines, no poison gas, no tanks, and also the area near to France called the Rhineland was also demilitarized. Talk about the militarization of the Rhineland. Remember, the Rhineland was very key to Germany because this was like their operational center, and therefore the demilitarization of the Rhineland was a very unfortunate event to the German people. What about money? What about money? Germany was asked to pay 6.6 billion sterling pounds of reparations to Britain. And remember, Germany has already suffered. It has already used a lot of money fighting their allies, and therefore putting on them this particular condition that they must pay reparations of 6.6 billion sterling pounds to the French people was something that they could not manage. And remember, during this particular time, the Weimar government that comes into power is going to encounter these particular crises, and we're going to see how does this affect the German people. Then there is also the blame. There is B for the blame, that Germany was asked. I think it is, I'm forgetting the article that put the guilt squarely on the doorstep of the German people. They were blamed for starting World War I. And the question that I'm asking you as a student of history at home, can you really say that Germany was the one to blame for the First World War? Why can't we blame Austria? Why can't we blame Russia? Why can't we blame France as well? So putting all the blame on Germany was not a fair assessment of the scenario. And the Germans rightly believe they were not the only ones to blame. They felt that the Treaty of Versailles had been forced on them by evil allies and the weak politicians of the Weimar government who signed the armistice. So the Treaty of Versailles caused a lot of problems, and it made German very weak. It made German bankrupt, especially the payment of the 6.6 billion sterling pounds of reparations. And the Weimar Republic was blamed for the treaty because they signed it, making the new government even more hated by the people. In fact, the president then, Friedrich Ebert, didn't want to sign this particular treaty. The army told him because they said they would be unable to stop an allied invasion. So they were signing it in order to prevent, again, the French, the British, and the United States of America invading Germany, that was now incapacitated because they had used a lot of their resources in the war and they could not be able to win this particular war. Remember, the questions on the Treaty of Versailles may ask about the German reactions, why the German hated it so much, why they were so angry. Source questions, we shall look at it much later about the source questions, how you can be given a cartoon and for you to make an assessment of what is happening for that particular cartoon. Also, during 1919, there were other problems that the Weimar Republic faced, and one of the problems is political extremists. Political extremists. For example, you look at a country like Somalia right now, or Democratic Republic of Congo, you have seen quite a number of political extremists who are giving a headache to those particular governments. So during this particular time, when the Weimar Republic is facing a lot of problems, there were some groups that felt they could bring solutions. They felt the Weimar government was taking a long trajectory. For example, we had the left wing. The left wing were the Spartacists. These were basically the communists who wanted the Weimar government to adopt a communism ideologies. And also we had the right wing. The right wing, these were the Nazis. People like the push, you remember the cap push, and also Rosa Luxemburg, who were leading this particular cap push. We shall look at it much later. So we have the extreme left, who are the communists. We are referring to them as the Spartacists. They believe that everyone should have equal pay and that no one should individually own anything. Everything should be shared. They believe that all factories should be owned by workers who will share the profits equally. So that refers to a communist approach of the economy. Then there are the fascists, who are the extreme right, who believe in survival for the fittest, kind of a capitalist approach. And therefore, for you as a student, you should be able to analyze this as a problem that the extremists, and we're talking about two extremists in this case. We've talked about the Spartacists, who are the communists. The Spartacists, who are the communists. Then we also have the Nazis. We also have the Nazis, who are advocating for survival for the fittest in the German side. So the Spartacists, they wanted to overthrow the Weimar Republic and create a communist government in Germany. They started a revolution in Berlin. They took control of government newspaper headquarters and telegraph bureau, but they failed to capture anything else. They won the support from the working class. And also the Weimar government used the Free Corps to defeat the Spartacists. They murdered Liebjan and Luxemburg and crushed the uprising. Free Corps put several other communist risings in 1919. So the Free Corps, the government, the Weimar government is using the Free Corps to crush the Spartacists. But these Free Corps are also going to get tired. They are also going to carry out their uprisings in what is known as the cap push. The word push means it's like an overthrow, getting into power illegally. We talk about the cap push. We also have the Munich push that was attempted by Adolf Hitler. So the cap push was about the Free Corps, which was the extreme right wing. The leaders were Wolfgang. The leader was Wolfgang Kapp, one of the Free Corps commanders. They wanted to overthrow the Weimar Republic, and and then come into power. So they marched into Berlin. This is how they planned it. They marched into Berlin and took it over. The President Ebert and the Weimar government were forced to run away. Kapp declared a new right-wing government. President Ebert appeals to the ordinary workers for help. They went on strike, refusing to take direction from the Kapps. And the Kapp eventually did not take over the Weimar government. Their leaders were arrested. However, the judges were very sympathetic to the right wings, and they were not killed like what we saw the Spartacists, like Rosa Luxemburg, who were killed during this particular time. So, dear student at home, as you prepare for exams, questions do not often ask about political extremists directly. Although you may get some questions about the Munich push, which we shall look at it much later, you should think about mentioning political extremists when talking about the problem the Weimar Republic faced that we've been talking about here. And also you must also talk about these uprisings. If asked about opposition, there was to the government. Also, you must remember that the Republic successfully defeated all of these uprisings. So you must mention these in questions about the achievements of the Weimar Republic, that one of them was able to crush these particular uprisings against the government. So let us wind up our lesson by looking at 1923. Let us go to the period of 1923. The period of 1923 is referred to as the year of crisis. Remember, during this particular time, Germany is facing a number of problems. Germany was still in a financial crisis from World War I. Inflation was already happening. They had to pay annual installments of 6.6 billion sterling pounds of reparation. These were crippling Germany. The Germans were hated and disrupted by other countries. No one would lend money for it to recover. So in 1923, an event happened that crippled France. This is the French Germany. This is the French invasion of Ruhr. The French invasion of Ruhr, and in January of this particular year, 1923, Germany couldn't keep up its reparations payments to France, and it defaulted. It didn't want to pay. France decided to teach Germany a lesson by invading its most important industrial area, that is the Ruhr. The Ruhr contained 80% of German steel production. The French thought they could take over its valuable steel production to make up for reparations Germany had missed. And the effects of the French invasion of Ruhr is that the Weimar government was outraged. The workers in the Ruhr refused to work for the French, and they went on strike. This damaged the economy more, and they then had no money to spend. The Weimar government tried to help them by printing more money for them to live on. And you know, once you print more money, there is hyper inflation, like what happened in Uganda under Idi Amin, who ordered the Ugandan Central Bank to print a lot of notes, a lot of money, so that he could use. It has led to the Ugandan currency being downgraded. And therefore, once there is a printing of many currency, it is just like you'll hear people in the streets of Nairobi or in the village asking you, why can't we print more money and give the Chinese so that we don't have these loans again? This is likely to cause hyperinflation, like what happened in Germany, that they started printing more notes to pay the steel workers. Therefore, it caused hyperinflation. And the effects of hyperinflation were really huge, in the sense that the workers now were badly affected. The jobs they said were most insecure. The workers lost their their faith in government. There is also the pensioners. What about the pensioners? They lost their pension. They became worthless. The rich were largely unaffected by the hyperinflation. However, the rich started seeing the government, the Weimar government, as incompetent. And then also, this led to the hatred for the Jews, in the sense that the Jews decided to invest their monies in foreign banks. And this is one of the reasons why Adolf Hitler hated the Jews and killed more than 9 million Jews of them, which we shall look at it much, much later on. Then this also led to unrest like the Munich Push. People blamed the Weimar government for these problems. People like Hitler saw a chance to overthrow it and launch the Munich Push in November. So for the purposes of the exam, there will be source questions. For those of you who will be doing paper 2, the source questions, 1923 crisis, that usually means both the invasion of Ruhr and hyperinflation. They are linked. They are like twins. You cannot talk about hyperinflation without talking about the French invasion of Ruhr, because it is the one that caused inflation. So in 1923, during this particular crisis, there was this particular man, as we wind up, who was known as Gustav Stresemann, who was made chancellor in Germany in 1923. So this Gustav Stresemann is looking for solutions. Germany is collapsing economically. So Gustav Stresemann is remembered as one of the most able politicians of the Weimar government. And if you read history of Germany, this is one of the people who helped Germany to come out of this particular hole of financial crisis. So people were really suffering. And Gustav Stresemann came up with a lot of solutions that helped to stabilize Germany. So let us identify the problem. What was the solution that Gustav Stresemann proposed? The first one is the French invasion of Ruhr. The French invasion of Ruhr. Stresemann, the solution of Stresemann was he sent the rural workers back to the French. Remember, when the French invaded Ruhr, the workers striked and they stopped working for the French, and therefore Gustav Stresemann told the people to go back to the industries to go and work for the French. What does this mean, or what was the significance of that? It means that the workers were able to be paid again, and also helping the Germany recover and giving their families money. What about hyperinflation? There was printing of so many notes. What did Gustav Stresemann recommend? Stresemann stopped the government from printing more money and introduced a new currency known as the Renten. The initial currency was the mark, and then introduced a new currency known as the Renten. So what was the impact of this? It stopped hyperinflation and made Germany money worth something. People were able to buy goods and properly paid, increasing the confidence. Then there's also the destroyed German economy. Gustav Stresemann took out a huge loan from the United States of America in what is known as the Dawes Plan, or the Dawes Plan. The Dawes Plan was taking a loan from the United States of America. It gave Germany an injection of cash to help its people and invest in its industry. The hope was that the money would help Germany get back on its feet. Then what about the massive reparations? What about the massive reparations that they were supposed to be paid to the French? The Dawes Plan also restructured the repayments, the reparations payments, so that they were more affordable, less money each year, but paid longer periods. So they said, we're supposed to pay this particular amount of money. Can we restructure and give us a longer repayment period? This means that Germany was able to have a way to recovery. And then also the last solution that was profferred by Gustav Stresemann about the other countries. Other countries were not trusting Germany. Germany could not get loans. And Gustav Stresemann, he signed what is known as the Locarno Pact. He signed the Locarno Pact. And what was the content, or what was the significance of the Locarno Pact? He was agreeing to never use violence, or Germany to never use violence to settle disputes. And now countries started trusting Germany. The United States of America gave quite a number of loans to Germany as a result of signing this particular Locarno Pact. And therefore, dear student, for the exam purposes, it is important for you to be able to say, or you'll find a question asking you, how far did the Stresemann policies help Germany recover? You need to know what is the main solutions were, but also how well they worked and why they didn't work so well. So that was basically our introduction about the German Republic. We began by looking at the Weimar Republic, the Weimar Constitution, the problems that the Weimar government faced together with some of the achievements, and also 1923. You'll find a question in the exam asking you, why was 1923 a year of crisis? Talk about the French invasion of rule, and also talk about the hyperinflation. Then also there was this particular individual who was actually awarded the Nobel Prize for bringing peace and countries trusting Germany again, who was known as Gustav Stresemann, who came up with a lot of policies that helped to resuscitate the collapsing economy of Germany. So after these policies were introduced by Gustav Stresemann, Germany enjoyed a long period of political stability, a period of economic stability that led to what we shall be able to look at in our next lesson, that is the Golden Age. A period between 1924 to 1929 is referred to as the Golden Age because during this particular time, the German economy is doing well, everybody is enjoying, there is no complaints. The Nazi party, the extremist party are going to be so irrelevant because the government is doing so well. then all of a sudden, again, the economy is going to collapse, because these loans that were given to the Germans, they're going to be recalled by the United States of America in 1929, after the Wall Street crash, the stock market, the Wall Street crash of the United States of America. After that, the United States of America is going to recall its money, and it is going to send Germany on the financial knees. Again, we shall look at it much later. So thank you for following my lesson through. My name is Teacher Jasper, and in case you want to reach to me, or you want some kind of mentoring, or some kind of being tutored in a very personal way, you can reach on me on 0711 873 512, 0711 873 512. Thank you so much for following through this particular lesson. IGCSE is a very interesting curriculum, and also it exposes your mind to understand about history, especially during this particular time of Germany as a state, because what Germany is faced during that particular time, you can even equate it to the situation here in Kenya, where you find that Kenya has been facing a lot of economic problems, and politicians are providing solutions. Is the Hustler Fund going to work? Is it equivalent to what Gustav Stresemann was proposing during this particular time? Only time will tell. So thank you so much, and I wish you a lovely time.
Kenyatta University.